So let's talk to the industries impacted by both sets of tariffs. First, the auto sector. Flavio Volpe is the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, and Brian Kingston is the president and chief executive officer of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Hi, both of you. Thanks very much for making the time for the conversation. Brian, I will start with you. The Chinese ambassador used the word unjustified to characterize the initial set of tariffs on electric vehicles, which were applied about a year ago by the then federal government under Prime Minister Trudeau. In your view, I know you take a different view. Why, in your view, are they justified?
They are extremely justified because the Chinese economic model follows a very simple formula: scale, dump, and destroy. They've scaled their industry through massive subsidies. $230 billion have gone into the EV industry. Then they dump the excess product abroad. China is going to be exporting, by the end of this decade, almost 10 million vehicles abroad. And then they destroy the industries in those markets by using predatory pricing and undermining the industrial sectors in those target export destinations. We cannot allow that to happen, and that's why the federal government took the actions that it did. They put in place a tariff to protect our market. It is the right move, and regardless of what the ambassador is saying, we cannot change that stance.
How has it, if at all, Flavio, protected the domestic market here? Because I think Canadians will be well aware of a lot that has changed in the interim, right? In that last year politically, particularly south of the border, and the policies pursued there around electric vehicles. Like, has this had the desired impact on the industry?
Well, the thing that we had asked for was to say, look, if manufacturers and the supply chain and the raw materials suppliers in the critical minerals and then also in steel and aluminum are going to have a chance in electrifying, and we've been pushing very hard for electrification because I think it plays to Canadian strengths, then we need to put these tariffs in place to buy some time with the Chinese. When Brian says they will be exporting 10 million vehicles a year, your viewers should know that's 10% of the world's market being exported from China at a subsidized rate. That's about as many vehicles are manufactured in the U.S., which a lot of you viewers might think is the world's biggest auto manufacturing play, but they make 11 million cars a year in that market. This scale, dump, and destroy is what they did in consumer electronics and what they did in solar. And, you know, I know that this is a tense moment when we have a trade fight with the two world's biggest economic superpowers, but giving up the market for no reason it doesn't work out for anybody, whether that's people who work in automotive or people who work in lumber or people who work in farming. And then again, and I'll just say this, I don't know why we're taking the cues from the Chinese ambassador. He was sent from Beijing. And it's very disappointing to hear premiers work off the cue from your interview to tell the rest of Canadians what we should be doing out loud. We can have disputes on what the Canadian position is, but do it in the locker room and then go out and play the game. Don't say, hey, by the way, we're going to lose to the Yankees and we should just give up.
Which we didn't, by the way. We're now worried about Seattle, but that's a whole different story for a different type of show. Brian, I wondered if you could, in layman's terms, when both you and Flavio refer to the practices that China engages in, I'm not sure, you know, I even fully understand like what it is that is so unfair. Because when we talk about subsidization, for example, there's a lot of that happening here. There's a lot of government money that, for example, was promised for the EV sector, for the auto sector, for a lot of protectionist stuff that we're doing, to be fair, against the backdrop of other countries doing protectionist stuff. But like, what is so wrong about the practice China engages in, and why is it so hard to counter?
Well, China is the big leagues of subsidization, sticking to the baseball analogy. The amount of money that they put into the sectors that they strategically target is far beyond anything that we would see in North America. Yes, governments have tried to support the auto industry here in Canada, in Ontario, but the amounts of money that are spent are nowhere close to what China does. Secondly, China benefits from weak labor practices and weak environmental practices. And so I find it perplexing when you've got groups, environmental groups in Canada saying we should have Chinese EVs in this country. I'll give you an example. A typical Chinese manufacturing facility is paying a production worker between $2 and $5 an hour. At a facility in Canada, a unionized facility, you're talking $44 an hour plus pension and benefits. On top of that, 60% of Chinese electricity is still coal-fired. We have 80% renewable electricity in this country. So what are we doing even contemplating this that makes absolutely no sense to offshore jobs and carbon emissions to China just so that people can have a slightly cheaper car.
They are, Flavio, though, contemplating this, right? The federal government, even in advance of this interview, said this is something that is up for review, which is a change in posture from the previous government under Prime Minister Trudeau, who insisted that they would stick with the plan that they had laid out last fall. Game out for us, if you could, the impact you think removing these tariffs would have on this sector, particularly at this time where it's at an incredibly vulnerable point.
Well, look, right now the biggest challenge is for the sector with Washington. We've got the White House saying they don't want Canadian cars. And there's about $80 billion worth of exports from Canada into the U.S. Every year that, like Premier Ford was talking about, employs 150,000 people directly and probably over 500,000 people indirectly. How this is going to play in Washington, where we talk about Fortress North America, and how it's going to play in Mexico City, who just levied a 50% tariff on all Chinese vehicles, whether they run on gas or electricity, is that Canada is opening the door for the Chinese who are not invested here, who have no American, Mexican, or Canadian content in any of their cars, and letting them in, kind of like when zebra mussels came into the Great Lakes in the 80s and crowded out everything else. And when Brian talks about subsidies, let me make it real plain for our viewers here. Yes, everybody heard about tens of billions of dollars potential in Canada. The Chinese in automotive, in EVs, is 230 billion US that we know. That's 350 plus Canadian, plus the subsidies in steel and aluminum and in plastics. That's over $1 trillion in subsidies, so that they could sell vehicles at a price that you really want them. Please take it from us. And in Mexico, that strategy worked, that in 1 year, in 2023, they went from 5% market to 20% market. Those are less sales for Canadian companies in the Mexican market, less sale for American-based manufacturing at the time that we're trying to negotiate staying in the CUSMA and the USMCA.
Okay, I got to leave it on that note. Both of you, thank you very much for making the time. I appreciate it, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Always a great conversation. Brian Kingston and Flavio Volpe. We also did invite Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe and Manitoba's Premier Wab Kinew on our program tonight to expand on the letters that they wrote Prime Minister Carney, but both were unavailable. Joining us now with the agricultural side, however, of this trade dispute is Rick White, the CEO of the Canadian Canola Growers Association. Hi, Rick. It's good to have you on the show. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks, Vashi. Good to see you.
Before we get into the prospect of these tariffs being removed, I just wondered if you could explain to our viewers the impact that the Chinese tariffs on canola has had on the sector.
Well, it's had a very significant impact on the canola sector because China is our second largest export market, and you know, it's about $5 billion, $5.2 billion in 2024 was the export value of canola seed, oil, and meal into the country, and it went in at no tariff. So when you look at it from a farmer's perspective, we see the prices are now depressed, and it's significant. You know, we're looking at about a $1.5 billion hit to the farmer sector right now, just on canola because of China. This industry and this sector of the canola industry contributes about $43.7 billion in both direct and indirect benefits to the Canadian economy, and a lot of that is to the rural economy, and it generates 200,000 jobs. So we're not a small sector, it's not a small crop, it's a significant crop, and this is a very serious problem for the industry, with having our second largest export market shut down because we cannot send seed oil or meal given these tariff levels.
Were you surprised at how explicit the ambassador was? I know behind the scenes, this was sort of understood, that it was a sort of quid pro quo, that those tariffs, even though China had used other justification, were in response to the EV tariffs. Were you surprised at all at how explicit the ambassador was in this instance?
I don't think surprise is the right word. You know, it was good to hear and acknowledge it very vocally, like he did, very clearly. We knew all along that that is what triggered the problems that we have in canola with China and all the tariffs that went on reciprocating from that. So it's good to hear it from the ambassador, and our own Canadian government has heard that as well. And we really, really hope that this is the start of a negotiation, because these tariffs need to be eliminated for canola. And the sooner the better, because every day, every week, every month that goes by, it's a big price to pay for our agriculture industry.
Have you received any assurances from the federal government, any cabinet ministers, the prime minister? Because I know that they've announced some supports for the canola industry, for example, and held some meetings. Any assurances that that could be in the cards, that the full lift of those tariffs could be in the cards?
Well, I think what we heard from the Prime Minister himself and several senior federal ministers as well is they understand fully what's at stake here. They are and have been supportive, and the Prime Minister had announced some support measures for the industry. So that was a start. But we have been heard, and we have been in communication, and we have been assured that this will get fixed, but the question is, how long is it going to take to get this cleared up?
I wanted to ask, kind of a bigger picture moving forward, if there is the ability to diversify away from China, or if it's a goal of the industry to diversify away from China as such a large market. And I ask because we've been here before, right? It's clear that when China feels that they have been unfairly targeted, they go after the sector where they can have the most impact. And canola has been vulnerable to that, and was, I believe it was in 2018, and even once before that. And now here we are again. Is there an objective to move away from such a reliance on China as a trade partner in this respect?
It's definitely an objective. The problem is that the Chinese market is so large. When we look around the world for other destinations for canola, they are very small, and they're spread around the globe, and they wouldn't even come close to replacing China. But what we do need to do is reduce our reliance on China. And so what we've been encouraging the federal government to do is to help in getting a biofuel, a renewable diesel, domestic biofuel and biodiesel here in Canada, which will utilize canola seed in the production of cleaner and greener renewable diesel. And that could take up 2.5 million tons of canola seed if we get the environment right for that to happen. And so far it hasn't. We've talked to the government. They are making steps towards making that happen and making it more of a reality. But it's a much better diversification strategy to have a made-in-Canada solution to utilizing more seed that we control, that doesn't have to cross international borders, and we don't have to rely on foreign governments and foreign regulations that can and do block us. And what China's has come to be is fairly regular, on again, off again. When they're on, it's big, it's good, but when they're off, holy smoke, it really brings the industry down, and it's hard on the industry, hard on farmers, hard on the investment longer term. So we need to move ourselves away, at least in a way that we can avoid putting so much reliance on the China market.
Okay, Rick, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for sharing your time tonight. I appreciate it and your insights.
Thank you, Vashi.